Good evening. My name is Hawkins, and once again, welcome to Moments in Time. Zola, Salena, and I have put this little thing together as a way of sharing some thoughts we have about different things, and for me to familiarize those who might be interested in some of what I've written over the years and some of what I'm writing right now. Last year, we had readings from long works that I had. I think I read a couple of books. I just really got into it. I think it was Zola's suggestion that I do that, but she also made the suggestion that I read shorter works, so I can blame her on both scores. Just kidding.
Guilty.
Guilty is charged. Okay. Two or three things I'd like to do before I start reading. First of all, I have a poem for my friend who said to me, Odie, why don't you write poetry? And I said, I'm not a poet. I think of myself as a prose writer. Odie, why don't you write a poem? I said, well, get off my back. Well, we'll get to that. Last night, yesterday night, as they say in Ghana, yesterday night, we were exposed to some information by a program on television that had to do with artificial intelligence. And the reason I bring it up is because, as a writer, I'm concerned that writers, amongst other creative people, might someday be replaced by artificial intelligences. And it's a real concern. As a member of the Writers Guild, I've had the opportunity to read quite a bit of information that they put out about their concerns, about all our concerns. If an artificial intelligence can sit down and write a War and Peace or a Native Son or go tell it on the mountain or the Bible or the Quran or whatever it is, I think we should all be concerned. In the program itself, to make a long story short about what I felt most concerned about, is the fact that the people who have been, people who are responsible for this creation, has let a genie out of the bottle that they have no idea what to do with. So they say things in answer to the question, well, okay, how do you feel about having released this, and what do you do about it? And once they get to doing all that word salad toss up, they come out and say, well, we think everything will be okay. We think everything will be all right.
We think
everything will be all right. One even said, well, it's kind of a black box situation, in other words, I don't know what the hell is going to come out of it. But that might be a little while. Who knows? Maybe next month. Now then, responding to those, and you know who you are, who said, bet you can't write a poem, bet you can't write a poem, bet you can't write a poem. I decided to write a poem, and that's exactly how I'm going to start off this particular moment in time. I can't claim that the poem is exactly mine. It might be considered a traditional poem. In Ghana, West Africa, there's a legend that the people who live in Ghana came in far ago times. They came from the northeast, which would be Egypt, and down through the Sahara Desert, which wasn't a desert then. And they had a really hard time. There's no real record of how many years they, wandered in the desert and finally wound up on the west coast of Africa. That's the legend is told. After arriving on the west coast of Africa, where there were fish in the water right there in the Gulf, and the jungles had food, and they celebrated. And they came up with a holiday called Homowah. And I found out about it living in Ghana when somebody was saying, why don't you come to Homowah to celebrate Homowah with us? Homowah was an area right up the coast. I was living in Osu neighborhood in Accra, and somebody else said, why don't you come to Labone? The city is divided, like most cities, into districts. We live in South Long Beach, North Long Beach, so forth. So I went and I had a good time. It's an eating holiday, but not like Thanksgiving. The people who are using Homowah celebrate the success that their ancestors had in developing a life in Ghana. So you can go to anyone's front door, unless you all are bitter enemies, and recite this little poem, which I learned in I think it was a 4th grade class with some kids. And since Ga is a tonal language, at some point there's no telling what I might have been saying, because they spent a lot of time giggling when it came time for Mr. Odie to do. But I hope that I've managed to develop some reasonable competence about using the language to do this particular poem. First, I'll read it in Ga, and then I'll translate it into English. The poem starts like this, and it has a call and response. Zola, would you be kind enough to give me a yow?
I certainly will yow you.
Well, appreciate that. Nawala, nawala.
Yow.
Epi na pe wo.
Yow.
Banya nina wo.
Yow.
Wa ye bo, wa ye bi na.
Yow.
Wa fe mumo.
Yow.
Wa se akba beni wa srashi.
Yow.
Lonte dinko akafo wa ten.
Yow.
Na ya se oyi wala don.
Yow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, here it goes. Nawala, nawala. Long life to you. Afina, pewa. I wish that this year will pass with no problems. Panya anina wa. 80 years should come and greet us. Wa ye bo, wa ye bi na. We hope that the rainy season will bring us plenty. The rainy season. Wa fe mumo. We want to grow old. Wa se akbar beni wa trashi. We hope to be alive next year. Alante dinkwa kafo watan. We hope no bad luck will cross your path. Na nyase oiwala don. We give thanks for everything. So that's my point. And if we have some people out there, brothers and sisters who speak God, I hope you'll be kind and gentle when you listen to my mispronunciation, my tonal misapprehensions. I'll try to do better next time. The piece I'd like to read this evening is very short, and it's more an essay than a story. The idea was given to me by a number of people. You know, you pull in ideas from everywhere. Zola is always saying, have you thought about so-and-so? I'm led to believe that she must spend most of her brain time going around and around, because she's always asking me, have you ever thought about so-and-so something? The matter of the fact is that there's so many things I haven't thinking about, that I don't know what I thought about. But then I've thought about a lot of things that I do think about. Dig it?
Of course.
Here's the name of the piece, and here it is. I call it the African Connection. Someday, a world-class study should be made to give all of us a concrete psychological understanding of how the various African cultures, the Yoruba, Igbo, Ashanti, Fante, Ga, Ewe, Akan, Mandinka, others, how they were forcibly filtered through so many foreign cultural prisms. British, Scots, Welsh, Irish, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Dutch, during the Pan-African Holocaust, and yet retained the core of their Africanity. One of the cores might be called the melanin factor. No matter how well we speak English, French, Portuguese, or Dutch, we are always aware that our various shades of darkness come from a common ancestral background. Dark skins are not a European legacy. Dr. Oscar Opoku of the University of Ghana at Legon suggests that spirituality is another core. There are many people, both African and non-African, who will dispute what I'm saying, but I will continue to say it anyway. I believe that the African sense of the spiritual is largely responsible for Africans surviving the Holocaust. All of the Holocausts. How else could one possibly explain how people locked into chattel slavery, animal slavery, could survive? The African Holocausts are of such a magnitude that it is immeasurable. How many were actually enslaved? How many died during the Middle Passage? How many were worked to death? We will never know. What we do know is that those who are enslaved have survived, and many are thriving incredibly. After such an ordeal, they were able to survive by appealing to one of the deepest fountains of spirituality in the world, African spirituality. In all of the places where our people were enslaved, we held on to spiritual forces that gave us the will and the strength to endure the unendurable. In Brazil, we call it candomblé, umbanda, macumba. In Cuba, Santeria, Shango in Trinidad, Venezuela, Obea, Poco in Jamaica, Barbados, Vodun in Haiti, and I call it a master stroke of African American PR, the religion in the United States. This African sense of spirituality co-opted the demeaning Christianity that was spooned to us to make us docile, subservient. As you can see from a visit to any African American Christian church, we have taken what they have gave to us and turned it into something else. Despite this knowledge of being from the same mother, complete with the spiritual vibes that Dr. Opoku speaks about. Oh, I'm back to myself now.
Yes.
Many people of African descent have weirdly stereotyped ideas about each other, brokered by the usual suspects. Jamaicans are clannish and stingy. Brazil has the largest concentration of African people in the world outside of Nigeria. Brazilians love to party too much. Haitians are superstitious. Africans can't run their countries properly. African America can't get it together. And if you are of African descent, and you read a little of Wole Soyinka, Osmani Simbani, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Jenny Achebe, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, or whoever is doing the current reality check, you will know that racism, as predicted by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, is the steel veil of the 20th century. And it doesn't look as though it would be lifted in the 21st century. And if you are reading the daily newspapers, you are aware of the threats posed by global manifestations of racism, economic neocolonialism in Africa, the rise of the right in Europe and America, and violence everywhere. but specifically in America because the American gun industry cannot force other populations who could afford to buy pistols and AR-15s. They won't allow their citizens to walk around in the streets with 6 shooters on their hips. So they have to sell all of their guns to Americans, which means that I think, what are we, about 315 million people or something like that? And we have 550 million guns.
Yep.
I went off there for a little minute, but I couldn't help because
Yes.
I just said violence everywhere. We will, of course, overcome neo-racism in much the same way that we overcame the old racism by all of the means at our disposal.
Yes.
Our ability to fight a common enemy would be made stronger if we did 2 simple interwoven things. Continental Africans must become more aggressive in their appeals, alliances to Africans in the diaspora. No African country has ever opened up a ministry of the diaspora. Jamaica even calls out, "Come home, man." Why not Ghana, Nigeria, Angola? Creole Africans, that is us, diasporans, must be made to understand that Africa is a barometer for our self-esteem.
Yes.
If we are of African descent and we don't take pride in that fact, who will? Who should? It isn't enough that we should celebrate Kwanzaa and swat ourselves in kente cloth every February. We must look at Africa as a place to invest time, study, energy, money, and soul. The rewards for both sides will be priceless. We definitely need to make a great effort to have the kinds of cultural exchanges that reinforce the bonds of heritage rather than continue to feed on the negative mindset that many of us have, the us and them syndrome. Mr. Rob Vernon of Compton, California, has suggested that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have at least 2 African daughters-in-law in every African-American family, or son-in-laws, and the same for every African family. Sadly, he admits, it might be a bit more difficult to persuade many African Americans to move to Accra, Lagos, or Luanda. African schools, beginning at the primary levels, should have mandatory African American Caribbean studies departments. In most African schools, there's an appalling lack of knowledge and understanding of Africans in the diaspora. While teaching a creative writing class at the Accra Girls Secondary School, I asked my students, "What do you know about African Americans?" I assumed that everyone knew something beyond Michael Jackson and Michael Jordan. They didn't know, as reflected on their innocent, puzzled faces. However, 3 days later, Aisha Muhammad came to class with a tattered history book written by an English guy. In centuries past, the paragraph said, in centuries past, many Africans from Ghana and other places on the west coast of Africa went to America to contribute their labor to the development of that country. Went to America. The words were chiseled into my brain pan forever. On the other side of the ocean, African American parents and institutions must take a more aggressive stance in their quest for information about our ancestral homeland, ancient and present, and push the media to mail the envelope more frequently. Shamefully, many African American parents have little or no knowledge to pass on to our children because we've never made enough effort to know anything from where we came from, about where we came from. At the end of the day, the Pan-African Holocaust, one of the greatest tragedies to happen on earth, should leave every thoughtful person of African descent with a collective racial ori. As the proverb says, in order to be able to tell others who you are, you should know yourself. Ashe.
Ashe.
And that's the short piece that I'm going to read this evening.
Why, thank you very much,
And
Odie
I
Hawkins.
thank you.
All right, that's right on time. And this time when they're banning books and studies of who we are, or who anybody is. For real.
Hey, for real.
All right. With that, your website is www.odiehawkins.com. Just Google Odie Hawkins and you will see quite a bit of stuff that Odie Hawkins is doing, which we're not talking about the stuff he is doing on his desk right now.
That's right.
But
You got it out. You got it out.
okay. But in the meantime, thank you.
Coming back at you tomorrow evening, right about the same time.
Sounds good.
Coming back at you tomorrow evening about the same time.
All right.
With something just a wee bit longer. Meanwhile,
This. Ciao.